Detroit,
We have a
2006.
snitch among us.
Inside a smoke-filled clubhouse,
And he
a
needs to be
highwayman
put
leader
down.
stands up and growls.
We have a snitch among us.
And he needs to be
And
put
he
down.
needs to be put down.
One member sits still, heartbeat thundering in his ears. Nobody knows the truth. He's wearing a wire. For months, he's fed the feds everything: phone calls, drug routes, stash houses. A single word, a wrong glance, and he disappears forever. But what the club doesn't know is that this betrayal is only the beginning. Because before it's over, secrets will surface, legends will fall, and even the godfathers were never who they seemed. So, how did the empire crumble from the inside? Welcome, my beautiful family and friends, to my YouTube channel. Please click on subscribe, like, comment, and share this video. Thank you specially for sticking around to this very moment. Now back to the story. It began, as many American legends do, not with glory but with a feeling, a hunger for freedom, a restlessness that spread through the streets of Detroit like the roar of engines before dawn. The year was 1954. The factories were loud, the nights were longer, and the men returning from war were tougher than steel. They had seen things most folks wouldn't speak about. They had lived fast, fought hard, and came home to a world that suddenly felt too quiet, too slow, too normal. These were the men who built cars by day and drank cheap whiskey by night. Men who knew the value of loyalty because out on the battlefield, loyalty meant survival. Back home, loyalty meant brotherhood, someone to trust when everything else was uncertain. And at the center of this restless storm was one man, Elburn Big Max Barnes. He was young, just 22, but his presence filled any room he walked into. Broad shoulders, loud laugh, the kind of man you'd follow into a bar fight without asking why. People didn't call him Big Max for nothing. He didn't just lead, he commanded. But not with fear and not with ego. With something rarer, respect. Big Max understood what these men were missing after the war. That the battlefield was gone, but the instinct to stand shoulder to shoulder never left. That motorcycles weren't just machines, they were escape. A throttle twist was a breath of freedom. The road was a place where rules dissolved, where a man wasn't defined by a uniform or a foreman or a time clock. And so he gathered a handful of veterans, factory workers and rough-edged dreamers, and they made a choice that would echo through decades. They formed a motorcycle club. Not just any club, a brotherhood. A place where a man could ride, fight, laugh, bleed, and know someone had his back. A place that valued silence, trust, and the unspoken code of the road. They named themselves the Highwaymen Motorcycle Club. No one knew then what it would become. No one could have imagined that this small social gathering of grease-stained knucklebusters would grow into one of the most feared outlaw organizations in Michigan history. They weren't thinking about power. They were thinking about identity, freedom, rebellion, a banner to ride under. In those early years, they weren't gangsters. They were outcasts of the American dream, welding together a new world from chrome and gasoline. They rode long into the night, gripping handlebars like they were holding onto a new purpose. Veterans who survived war now survived each other. Factory men who spent 12 hours building cars now spent 12 more tearing up asphalt. Their clubhouse smelled of beer, leather, motor oil, and sweat. To outsiders, it looked wild, dangerous even. To them, it felt like home. Detroit in the 50s was booming. Factories lit the skyline. Steel and sparks shaped the future beneath cavernous ceilings. On payday weekends, the bars overflowed with music, smoke, and motorcycles lined like soldiers at attention. The highwaymen weren't alone. Clubs were popping up everywhere like weeds between cracks in the factory pavement. But something about the highwaymen was different. Older bikers saw it. Younger ones envied it. They weren't just riding. They were building. They drafted rules, paid dues, held meetings like soldiers planning a mission. There was hierarchy, order, tradition. They called Detroit the mother chapter, and every new chapter was a child of it. A legacy, a lineage. Men earned their patch, they didn't buy it. You didn't just join, you proved yourself. Showed up, fought when needed, stayed silent when required. You didn't fold under pressure. You didn't talk to cops. You didn't disgrace the club. One rule stood above all others, whispered like gospel. Club business stays in the club. Silence above everything. Silence meant trust. Trust meant life. And in those early years, people admired them more than feared them. They looked like rebels from a Marlon Brando film. Black leather, slick hair, roaring engines echoing through downtown. A symbol of something America pretended to love but secretly feared. Free men. It was romantic.
Raw.
Electric. They weren't criminals. They were legends in the making. Yet beneath all legends lies a shadow. As the 60s rolled in, Detroit began to change. The auto industry creaked under pressure. Neighborhoods shifted. Poverty crawled into places it once had no place in. Tensions rose between clubs. For some, riding wasn't enough anymore. The world was harsher, money tighter, and opportunity came with risk. And in the streets of Detroit, risk came dressed in crime. Small fights became brawls. Brawls became turf wars. Words turned into warnings. Warnings into blood. The Highwaymen didn't seek war, but they damn sure didn't run from it. They stood tall, chests and cuts worn like armor. And as rival clubs pushed in, the Highwaymen pushed back harder. They gained ground not because they were the biggest, but because they were unbreakable, united,
Loyal.
and loyalty is powerful, dangerously powerful. By the end of the 60s, the Highwaymen weren't just another group of weekend riders. They were top dogs in Michigan. Their mother chapter on Michigan Avenue became legend, a fortress of chrome and pride. Men walked through those doors knowing they belonged to something bigger than themselves. A club with a creed carved in bone. Respect the club. Protect the brotherhood.
Keep your mouth shut.
They shaped culture. Organized rallies. Patched in new members across the state. The highway became their kingdom, Detroit the throne. Bars opened doors when they arrived. Crowds parted at the growl of their engines. You didn't cross a highwayman unless you had a death wish. And yet, to many locals, they were folk heroes. Rebels who rode where they pleased and lived by their own law. They represented something America both loved and hated, the man who answers to no one. But the road to power is paved with choices, and choices have consequences. As the 70s dawned, the rough edges sharpened. The line between brotherhood and outlaw blurred. Stories whispered through back rooms. Deals made in shadows. Some members dipped into crime for profit. Others didn't ask questions. And the club grew stronger through it all. But strength invites attention. Attention invites enemies. And enemies bring trouble. Still, the Highwaymen stood tall. Even as Detroit's factories slowed and neighborhoods crumbled, the club remained. Their funerals were spectacles. Hundreds of bikes lined like iron horses, engines thundering like war drums. When Big Max died at just 48, the city felt it. They sent him off like a general fallen in battle. A 21-gun salute from automatic shotguns cracked the sky, thunder rolling off factory walls. He was their godfather long before anyone said the word. And when the dirt settled on his grave, his story was far from over. Because leaders die, but the legends they create live long after. After Big Max, the world of outlaw bikers shifted. The romance remained, but so did something darker. Something less polished, more ruthless. New leaders stepped in, wearing his legacy like a crown. The club tightened its ranks, strengthened its structure, and spread through Michigan like wildfire.
Detroit.
East Side, West Side, 8 Mile, Lansing, Monroe, Downriver. Patches multiplied. Brothers multiplied. Power multiplied. But so did ambition. Money. Secrets. Temptation. The Highwaymen, once built on freedom and loyalty, now carried weight, territory to defend, rivals to watch, law enforcement to avoid. Their silence became more than a rule. It became a shield. A necessary one. And those who broke that silence paid dearly. Yet the outside world rarely saw the violence whispered behind clubhouse doors. They saw parades, charity rides, chrome shining under summer sun. To the public eye, the Highwaymen were a cultural icon, rebels, yes, but American rebels. Loud, proud, unfiltered. They stood for something ordinary men only dreamed of, living by your own code. But the truth is never just one thing. It is shadows and sunlight woven together. The Highwaymen were brothers, but brothers fight. They were kings, but kings attract traitors. And slowly, almost silently, the first cracks began to form. The club that rose from war and brotherhood now lived in a world of competition, survival, and whispers. Some members clung to the old ways, the rides, the rallies, the brotherhood. Others saw opportunity in addiction, profit in risk, power in fear. Lines blurred like tire marks across asphalt.
Detroit changed.
America changed. And the Highwaymen would have to change too, or be swallowed by the world they once ruled. But not yet. For now, the roar of engines still meant freedom. For now, the code still held strong. For now, silence still protected them. Yet even in these golden years, beneath leather and chrome, something else existed. Something hidden. Something only a few would ever learn about, and fewer would survive speaking of. Some said it didn't exist. Some swore it was real. A faction within the brotherhood. A darker brotherhood inside the brotherhood. One secret group hid beneath the leather and chrome, operating like ghosts, whispered about but never named aloud. A name that would one day return to haunt the club like thunder rolling across decades. But the glory wouldn't last. Because in every empire built on silence, the loudest sound is the first crack. And cracks were coming. The men who once raised their voices in laughter around the bar would soon raise them in accusation. The brothers who swore lifelong allegiance would one day point across a table and ask a question no outlaw ever wants to hear. Who among us is the rat? But that story comes later. Right now, we stay here, where it all began. In the oil-stained birth of a legend. In the rumble of engines that shook Detroit awake. In the days when you earned your respect with your fists, not your phone. When men lived hard, rode harder, and died young. When brotherhood was sacred, loyalty was life, and betrayal was unthinkable. Back when the Highwaymen were more than a club. They were a family built in the shadow of factories. Forged by war, bound by the road. And to those who wore the patch back then, it meant everything. Even today, ask an old rider what it felt like to roll down Michigan Avenue wearing that winged skull on your back. He might look away for a moment, eyes drifting to a place only he can see. He might say it felt like nothing else. Like power. Like pride. Like being part of something eternal. But if you watch closely, you might also see a flicker of something else. A memory. A regret. A ghost. Because every brotherhood has a price. And some prices take decades to collect. If you believe brotherhood should never be bought or sold, hit subscribe. Honor loyalty. The engines will roar again in Act 2. But with the rise of power comes the rise of danger. And this empire, born in freedom, will soon be tested by secrets that cut deeper than any knife. Power rarely collapses overnight. It erodes. It rots from within, quietly at first, like rust on chrome. You don't notice until the shine is gone and the metal beneath is flaking apart in your hands. After Big Max died, the Highwaymen kept riding, kept drinking, kept fighting, and for a time, the engine of the brotherhood still roared like the old days. But beneath the laughter and the long nights at the clubhouse, something darker began to take root. The same loyalty that built the club now wrapped it like barbed wire, tight, unforgiving, ready to cut anyone who reached for freedom or justice. Old-timers still talk about those years with pride, but there's something else in their voice too. Something heavy. Because by the late 1970s and early 80s, whispers began circulating about a secret inside the secret. A faction within the Highwaymen so feared, so hidden, that even patch members kept their eyes low when the name was spoken. They called them the Lightning Rods. No one agrees where the name came from. Some say it meant they drew trouble like steel draws thunder. Others say it was because their violence struck fast, silent, and deadly. A bolt of lightning doesn't warn before it hits. It just burns the world beneath it. The stories sound like myth, like fireside ghost tales told by bikers who drank too much and lived too hard. But myths always start with truth, and one man would drag those secrets into the light. His name was Lonnie Hamilton, though the world would come to know him by another name. Loner. He wasn't polished like Big Macs. He wasn't loud or charming. He was a drifter, a wanderer, a man who lived like a stray dog with gasoline in his veins. He rode from state to state, gambling, hustling, taking what he wanted, and giving nothing back. A man who believed the world owed him blood. When he joined the Highwaymen, he didn't come looking for brotherhood. He came looking for opportunity. And opportunity is exactly what he found. Years later, sitting in a prison interview room with a reporter, Lonnie would speak words that shocked even hardened investigators. He told stories of violence, murder, and ritual. Stories so brutal they sounded unreal, unless you knew the world he came from. He claimed the lightning rods recruited men willing to cross a line most bikers swore never to cross: murder. He said their initiation wasn't a handshake or a patch ceremony. It was blood. A killing witnessed by two members, like a dark sacrament, sealing loyalty through death. Was it true? Was it exaggeration? Or was it a man facing God and trying to cleanse his soul with confession? No one can say for certain. But law enforcement listened. And suddenly, rumors became indictments. In the mid-1980s, the feds tightened their grip. A grand jury convened. Names were whispered in courtrooms. Secrets long buried clawed to the surface. And when the indictment dropped, it was a hammer blow. 15 counts, 22 men charged, including the most powerful leaders the Highwaymen had to offer. Men who once stood shoulder to shoulder, now stood shoulder to shoulder in courtrooms, facing decades in prison. Some called Lonnie a traitor. Others called him brave. Maybe he was both. Maybe he was neither. But one thing is certain. The Highwaymen felt the blow. And though the club survived, it emerged changed. Harder. Colder. Suspicious of its own shadow. Because nothing scars a brotherhood like betrayal. After the indictment, funerals became quieter. Meetings became tense. New recruits were watched more closely. Old friends looked at each other with questions in their eyes. The lightning rods, whether real or rumor, became a ghost that haunted the club. A reminder of what men do when loyalty twists into violence. And yet life moved on. Wheels turned. Engines roared. Decades rolled forward like a never-ending road. When the 1990s arrived, a new generation of writers patched in. Young men who didn't know Big Macs personally, but worshipped his legacy. They weren't veterans of war. They were veterans of Detroit. Streets raised them. Drugs fed them. Money tempted them. Guns protected them. And the world they inherited was not the romantic empire of 1954. It was a battlefield with different rules. What began as weekend rebellion was now business. Cocaine flowed like beer at the clubhouse. Marijuana moved through back doors in bulk. Ecstasy and pills followed soon after. And where there are drugs, there is money. Where there's money, there's power. And where there's power, someone always wants more. The Highwaymen adapted. They built networks through Detroit like veins through a body. Trucks were welded with secret compartments. Calls were coded with terms like Scooby snacks. Stolen bikes were stripped to bone and rebuilt like Frankenstein machines. And through it all, the club remained silent. Until one man broke that silence, not under threat, not under arrest, but by choice. His name was Doug Burnett. He wasn't a hardened killer. He wasn't a ghost like Lonnie, or a legend like Big Macs. He was a kid who grew up around bikers, drinking at their bars, dreaming of the patch like a boy dreams of a flag. When he finally earned it, he felt unstoppable. Nights with the Highwaymen were wild, money fast, women faster, trouble always around the corner. But trouble grows teeth. And in the dark hours when the beer fades and the adrenaline drains, a man faces himself. Doug didn't like who stared back in the mirror. He saw a man slipping toward prison or a grave. So one day, without warning, without a gun to his head, Doug walked into an FBI office and asked to talk. Imagine that moment. A young highwayman, heart pounding, knowing that if a single brother learned what he was about to do, he'd never see another sunrise. But he walked in anyway. Called it conscience. Called it fear. Called it survival. Whatever you call it, it changed everything. Doug agreed to wear a wire. He went back to the club like nothing had happened. Smiled, drank, rode, laughed. Yet under his shirt, a microphone listened like a silent witness. Every joke, every deal, every threat. His chest became a confession booth for the federal government. He bought drugs using government money. He recorded phone calls. He passed names, addresses, routines, weaknesses. He was a highwayman by night, a federal weapon by day. And the feds loved him for it. But informants don't stay secret forever. Not in a world built on silence. Slowly, things began to unravel. Stash houses were raided. Shipments vanished. Phones clicked strangely, like someone else was listening. Paranoia crawled through the club like ants through an open wound. Eyes narrowed. Voices lowered. Meetings filled with suspicion. Men asked questions they never asked before. Who got busted? Who talked? Who slipped? Who's dirty? Who's wearing a wire? Brother began to look at brother differently. Doug could feel it. One wrong step and he was dead. Every ride felt like a funeral procession he hadn't been told was his. Every meeting felt like a test. He sat at the bar surrounded by men who might kill him if they knew the truth. Imagine that weight, that fear, that guilt pressing like a gun barrel to the back of your neck. Every heartbeat asking, is tonight the night they find out? And then one day, the storm finally broke. Rumors reached the wrong ears. The Latin Counts, a street gang with deep ties to the Highwaymen, caught the scent. Their leader, Anthony "Chocolate" Vero Montez, looked Doug in the eyes one night and told him something cold. Something unforgettable. If Doug betrayed him, he wouldn't just die. His family would die too. Fear is powerful, but so is guilt. And in the end, Doug kept recording, kept feeding the feds, because stopping would have been death either way. Pressure built like a boiling engine. The club launched witch hunts searching for leaks. They questioned members, watched behavior, counted phone calls. Yet the wire kept hearing. The FBI kept listening. Evidence stacked like bricks in a wall closing in. And then the impossible happened. Caught up in suspicion and fury, someone asked the Highwayman leadership for permission to kill Doug Burnett. Permission to eliminate a brother. And what came back wasn't a no. It wasn't a warning to stand down. It was something stranger, something colder, something that spoke volumes about the world the club had become. They could proceed with the hit as long as Doug wasn't wearing his highwayman vest. A technicality, a loophole, a twisted respect. We won't kill a brother in colors, but take the patch off his back, and he's fair game. That sentence, recorded forever on federal audio, sealed the fate of dozens of men. Because now the FBI had not just drug deals and thefts and trafficking. They had conspiracy to murder. They had enough to burn an empire. Raids hit like thunder. Doors kicked in at dawn. Members dragged from beds. Stash houses emptied. Boundaries between friend and foe shattered. The brotherhood that once stood like iron now fractured like old bone. Indictments spread wider than anything the Highwaymen had ever seen. Over 100 people, members, associates, even 4 law enforcement officers, were charged. 2 lawyers were named in corruption ties. Courtrooms overflowed. Families wept. Engines went silent. The Highwaymen weren't just fighting rivals anymore. They were fighting the United States of America. And the United States rarely loses. The club still had loyalists, still had strength. But this time, the enemy wasn't the outcasts or the vigilantes or the Mustangs. The enemy was evidence. Recorded voices. Photographs.
Testimony.
The kind of betrayal you can't punch, can't outrun, can't hide from. And yet, even as the net tightened, even as indictments stacked like sandbags in a flood, a single question whispered through the outlaw world. If Doug Burnett was the first rat, would he be the last? But decades later, another betrayal would go further than anyone imagined. For now, the story darkens. Because the federal machine is waking up. The courtroom lights are warming. Judges are preparing their gavels. Prosecutors are sharpening their questions like knives. And in the shadows of Detroit, highwaymen are realizing something terrifying. An empire built on silence can crumble with one voice. Courtrooms are strange places for men who live their lives by fists, engines, and roads. A biker knows how to fight in alleys, in bars, in parking lots under neon buzz. But court? Court is sterile, silent, deadly in a different way. Here, battles are fought with testimony instead of bullets, with evidence instead of knuckles. No roar of motorcycles, only whispers, paper shuffling, and a judge's gavel waiting like a hammer on an anvil. By 2010, the government had stacked a mountain of charges built brick by brick from Doug Burnett's wire, months of surveillance, and years of suspicion. The Highwaymen entered court not as legends of the Detroit streets, but as defendants. 6 of their top men walked in wearing suits instead of leather. Men once respected, feared, followed. Now they sat under fluorescent lights, backs straight, eyes hard, staring at prosecutors who didn't ride motorcycles and didn't care about brotherhood. Among the accused were names that carried weight. Leaders, decision-makers, men who once commanded chapters with a nod. Now the government wanted them locked away for decades, stripped of power, patches, and freedom. The trials stretched long, heavy, exhausting. Witnesses took the stand. Confidential informants stepped forward like ghosts from the past. Some were ex-members. Some were former allies. Some were enemies finally tasting revenge. The courtroom heard stories of drug shipments hidden in tanker trucks, motorcycles chopped for profit, extortion, threats, violence buried beneath decades of silence. Jurors listened, expressionless, as another side of the Highwayman story unfolded, one the public rarely saw. But nothing prepared anyone for him. Daniel "Rocket" Sanchez. Sanchez wasn't just a witness. He was a bomb waiting to explode. He'd lived the life, worn the patch, fought beside these men. Then one day he flipped. Some say to save himself. Some say because he feared what silence would cost. Whatever the reason, when he took the stand, the courtroom shifted. Everyone knew something big was coming. He started calm, voice steady. He spoke about his rise from a street gang to the Highwaymen, calling the club the upper echelon of the Underworld. He talked about drugs moving like weather, constant, predictable, profitable. He spoke of meetings, club rules, chain of command. Nothing new yet. Nothing shocking enough to make headlines. But then he paused, looked across the room, cleared his throat. One sentence changed the air. He claimed he lured a 19-year-old named Juan Butler into a Highwayman clubhouse to be murdered. The room froze. Jurors leaned forward. Attorneys whispered to each other. And from the back of the gallery, a woman stood up, voice trembling but fierce. "He murdered my son." It wasn't a whisper. It was a scream, raw, piercing, soaked in years of grief. Court security rushed forward. The judge's gavel slammed like thunder. The jury was ordered out. But chaos had already arrived. That moment pierced deeper than any indictment ever could. Murder. Not rumor now. Not bar talk. A mother accusing a man of killing her child. The courtroom, once cold and controlled, had erupted into the kind of emotion bikers understood more than lawyers ever would. Pain, vengeance, betrayal. Rocket continued after order was restored. His testimony painted dark pictures, stories of bodies dumped, whispers of clubhouse fires set to burn evidence, men who disappeared without explanation. He claimed higher-ups knew. That power protected killers. That silence was enforced not by brotherhood, but by fear. Were these claims proven in court? Not fully. No one was convicted for Butler's murder that day. But the accusation, the mere possibility, left a scar on the Highwayman legacy that no appeal or denial could wash away. You can fight charges. You can fight evidence. But how do you fight a grieving mother's scream echoing through a courtroom? And just as that fire began to settle, another spark ignited. Rumors of corruption started swirling. Police officers accused of tipping off the club, lawyers allegedly entangled in criminal dealings, informants hidden even from defense teams. The lines blurred between outlaw and authority, between justice and manipulation. One prosecutor was later suspended over unrelated misconduct, adding fuel to conspiracy whispers. People wondered quietly. If the law bends, who is really innocent? If justice plays favorites, who really wins? The trial dragged into its later days. Faces turned gaunt from stress. Some defendants remained stone-faced. Others watched the floor like it could swallow them whole. Years of power reduced to hours of testimony. And then another twist. During a legal exchange, something surfaced that chilled the room. It was hinted, carefully, indirectly, that one of the men who once hunted snitches inside the Highwaymen with relentless obsession may have been an informant himself at one time. The rumor pointed towards Steve Nagy, a powerhouse, a leader, a man who stood at meetings vowing to root out traitors. If true, it meant something devastating. The wolf-hunting rats might have been working with the feds. Courts couldn't prove it. Documents were murky. Names blurred. Lawyers denied it fiercely. No ruling confirmed it.
But the seed was planted.
And once planted, it grows. Members whispered about it for years. Some believed it completely. Others defended him until death. Truth or lie, it fractured trust like a hammer to glass. Because in biker culture, there is one sin worse than murder, worse than dealing, worse than anything. Becoming the rat you swore to kill. And whether deserved or not, that shadow followed Nagy long after prison gates closed behind him. By the end of the trial, verdicts hit like body blows. Many Highwaymen leaders were found guilty. Racketeering, drug trafficking, conspiracy, crimes bundled together like rope. Sentences stretched long. Decades. Lives effectively ended behind bars. Some pled out earlier for lighter time. Others never forgave themselves for testifying. Families stood outside courthouses holding photographs of fathers, sons, husbands. Men who once rode free, now wearing prison jumpsuits. The mother of Juan Butler never saw justice delivered for her son. Lonnie Loner Hamilton, whose stories first drew federal eyes decades earlier, served 50 years in prison for another murder entirely. Joyce, the carnival worker whose identity remains largely unknown. In his late years, Lonnie softened, or pretended to. Claimed faith changed him. Claimed he never killed anyone beyond the one he confessed to. Time blurs memory. Or maybe guilt demands revision. Eventually, Lonnie was paroled. An old man now. Wrinkled hands instead of bloody ones. No bike under him, just years left to wonder how many ghosts followed. Joyce, the girl he strangled, still has no confirmed family to mourn her publicly. Just a cold case file, and a story half swallowed by history. Some believe she deserved closure. Others say closure is a myth. Perhaps silence buried her deeper than any grave. But even after leaders fell, after indictments, after sentences handed down like final verdicts on an era, the Highwayman story did not end. Clubs rarely die. They fade, fracture, rebuild, linger like smoke. You cannot kill identity so easily. Culture lives beyond iron bars. To this day, you can find old men with faded tattoos and eyes that have seen things most people never will. They sit at bars, sip beer, stare into distance. Ask them about the lightning rods. They might laugh, deflect, change the subject. Ask about Burnett. They might curse under their breath. Ask about loyalty. They go quiet. Because they know something the public rarely understands. Brotherhood is powerful. But betrayal cuts deeper than bullets. Some say the Highwaymen still ride today, not as loudly, not as boldly, but in the corners of Detroit where the past never fully dies. Others whisper that the club fractured beyond repair, that the lightning rods were never real, or that they were too real. Stories conflict like roads splitting in dark forest. Truth is a coin flipped between perspectives. What's certain is this. A club born in freedom and rebellion was undone by the same thing that built it, loyalty. Loyalty twisted. Loyalty broken. Loyalty weaponized. And when the dust finally settled, the legend remained. Jagged. Complicated. Human. Some members were monsters. Some were heroes. Most were something in between, men shaped by war, by poverty, by the streets of Detroit, and the cold reality that survival requires choices. Some good. Some unforgivable. The Highwayman story is not about saints or devils. It's about men. And men are messy. Men fail. Men betray. Men protect. Men destroy. No brotherhood, no matter how strong, is immune to time, temptation, or truth. Try to picture an old highwayman, years later, standing alone in his garage. A bike under a tarp. Dust gathering like a shroud. He pulls it back. Chrome still shines beneath. He runs his hand across the tank, remembering nights of laughter, fists, engines roaring like thunder. Remembering friends buried. Brothers locked away. Secrets he'll take to his grave. Maybe he smiles. Maybe he cries. Maybe both. Because nostalgia is gentle. Memory is cruel. Some say the club lives on in shadows. Others swear the lightning rods were real. But one truth remains. Brotherhood built on silence can fall with a single whisper. If you enjoy true crime stories told like a movie, subscribe to Crime Syndicate Tales, where power always has a price.